All right, let's get right into it. Today we're cracking open a really fascinating academic paper that kicks off with a simple yet, well, deadly puzzle. And trust me, this is way more than just a thought experiment. It's a full-on challenge to a huge idea in economics and game theory, and it's delivered with an incredibly clever and pretty dark twist.
So I want you to imagine this. Picture yourself in a locked room. In another, separate room is your absolute worst enemy. Both of you have a single big red button on a table in front of you, and a clock is ticking down. Before time runs out, you have to make one choice: push the button or do nothing. So, what's it going to be?
Okay, so the stakes here could not be higher. If you press that button, your enemy is gone. You win. You live. Simple as that. Now, if you do nothing, there's a chance you both walk away free, but only if your enemy also does nothing. Because if they press their button and you don't, you're the one who doesn't make it out. The authors of the paper call this the Big M game.
Now, your gut might be screaming one answer at you, right? But this isn't just about what feels right. It's a formal problem in a field called game theory, which is all about analyzing these kinds of decisions with pure, cold, hard logic. And when we apply that logic, well, that's when things get really interesting and, frankly, a little disturbing.
This right here is how a game theorist sees the problem. It looks complicated, but it's pretty simple. Let's break it down. M stands for a huge, massive negative. Think of it as the ultimate cost of dying. That little epsilon, that's a tiny, tiny positive feeling. The small bit of satisfaction you might get from, seeing your enemy gone. And a 0, that's just you both live. Nothing gained, nothing lost. So, let's think this through logically, like a machine would. You have no idea what your enemy is going to do, so you have to game out both options. First, let's say your enemy is definitely going to press the button. What should you do? Well, if you don't press, you die and they live. If you do press, you both die. Now, rationally speaking, dying together is considered just a little bit better than dying while your enemy gets to walk away. So logic says, press. Okay, now what if your enemy doesn't press? If you also don't press, you both live. Great. But if you do press, you live and you get that tiny epsilon bonus. So in this scenario too, the most rational choice is to press the button.
You see what's happening? No matter what the other person does, the purely logical, self-interested choice is always to press the button. This leads to what's known as a Nash Equilibrium. It's a state where no one can do better by changing their strategy alone. And in the Big M game, the Nash Equilibrium is mutual destruction. Both players press, and both players die. Logic wants you dead.
But does that sit right with you? I mean, really? Does it seem reasonable to choose certain death over even a chance at life? This is the exact discomfort the authors of this paper are banking on. They're basically arguing that maybe, just maybe, when the stakes get this extreme, pure logic isn't the whole story.
And they're not shy about it at all. They say it flat out. They have a powerful gut feeling that real people, faced with this choice for real, would overwhelmingly choose to cooperate and live. They just can't bring themselves to believe that we'd all rationally choose to die.
And this is what I love about this paper. It has so much personality. Just check out this footnote. One of the authors basically calls out his co-author, saying he stubbornly insists he would have pushed the button, and then he throws in a little jab, saying his buddy hasn't been able to find anyone willing to try the experiment with him for real. It's such a great human moment in the middle of a serious academic paper.
So the authors felt in their bones that they were right, but you can't exactly run a deadly experiment like this to prove it. But then, as the story in the paper goes, they stumbled across something unbelievable. They claim to have found a historical document detailing a series of real-world trials that were almost identical to the Big M game. This document, they claimed, dated back to December 1944. It was supposedly a report detailing the results of a high-stakes experiment that seemed to provide the exact data they needed to test game theory against human intuition.
And the scale of this so-called experiment? It was just horrifying. The document said it was performed on 500 pairs of identical twins. And the results? They were absolutely staggering. Out of 500 pairs, an overwhelming majority, 448 of them, chose not to press the button, meaning both twins survived. 50 pairs sadly died from other causes, like starvation. And the number who followed the cold logic of the Nash Equilibrium? Just 2. Only 2 pairs chose mutual destruction. This data seemed to prove the author's point in the most dramatic way possible. Humanity, it seems, trumps logic.
But wait a second. An experiment like this, in 1944, involving twins?
It sounds monstrously familiar, doesn't it? And that's exactly what the authors are counting on. This is where the paper pulls back the curtain and reveals its genius.
The paper casually mentions that the document was authored by Josef Mengele, the infamous Nazi doctor at Auschwitz. And that's meant to stop you cold. It forces you to ask, could this possibly be real? Would anyone actually use data this horrific to argue a point about economics? The idea itself is repulsive. And the answer was right there from the very beginning, hidden in plain sight in the paper's abstract. The authors literally give a warning. This article is special, not everything is true. The experiment, the data, the Mengele document, it was all a fiction, a brilliant, dark, academic trap. So what's the point of this whole elaborate trick? It's because by presenting us with data that so powerfully confirms our own gut feeling, they make their arguments stronger than any formal proof ever could. They trick us into siding with our intuition over the cold logic, proving their point not with numbers, but with a story that forces us to rely on our own moral compass.
So after making their point in such a stunning way, the authors finally get to their actual proposal. They argue that game theory itself needs an update, a new rule for these extreme situations where logic seems to lead us straight off a cliff. Here's their idea, basically. For most games, the Nash Equilibrium works great. But in extreme games like this one, when the logical outcome is catastrophically worse than another possible outcome, we should just throw it out. When the gap between mutual death and mutual life is, as they put it, too big, we should reject the cold logic and instead choose the obviously better solution. In economics, that's called the Pareto dominant solution, the one where everybody is better off, or at least no one is worse off.
And at the end of the day, that's the real, powerful question this strange paper leaves us with. It's not really about buttons or mortal enemies. It's about the limits of pure, cold rationality. The authors don't try to define exactly how big that difference needs to be. Instead, they leave us with a much bigger thought to chew on. In a world that is more and more driven by data, by algorithms, and by logic, at what point do we need to program in an override switch, a rule that says, no matter what, choose life?